Hi everyone, my name is Barbara. I'm a Sustainability Education Officer for Willoughby Council. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we are today, we are all on the lands of Aboriginal traditional owners. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging, and thank them for sharing with us their immense knowledge on how to care for this country. So at Willoughby Council, as well as cutting greenhouse gas emissions from our operations, we're also supporting our community to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040 or sooner. We're also sourcing 100% renewable energy for all of our council operations. Reaching our targets and creating a cleaner, healthier, and more resilient city is possible through the combined efforts of council, community groups, and businesses, and obviously through the action of each resident. So at Willoughby Council, we have a program for homeowners that live in standalone houses. There's solar bulk buy that we've put in place that residents can access to receive solar and battery systems at a preferential price through a vetted supplier. And if you know anyone who is interested in that, I will pop a link in the chat and in my follow-up email as well. But I know you're all here to hear about apartment buildings. So for apartment buildings, for a council, we can also simplify the process of choosing the right solar systems. And we provide a limited number of free level 1 energy audits that are conducted by an independent consultant. And it provides advice on the install of a solar PV system that is unique to your building. We have a number of eligibility criteria, and the strata needs to meet them and apply in order to access the service, because we only have a limited number that we can run. So I'll pop a link to the application form as well if you're interested. But tonight we'll be talking about SolShare. So the session will be presented by William Anstey. As the Housing Partnership Manager at Allume Energy, Will fosters partnerships to drive sustainable solutions in the housing sector. This involves advocating for policy development in strata and collaborating with the broader clean energy industry. Will also oversees Allume's shared solar projects in existing and new build apartment complexes to unlock rooftop solar for apartment residents across Australia. We'll also have Nigel from Pingala Community Solar, who will pop by to share his case study and how they've been able to use SolShare for their community social housing projects around Sydney. So we'll start the webinar with the presentations, and then we'll follow with a Q&A. So if you have any questions at all for any of our speakers, please pop them in the Q&A function on Zoom. And we'll start with Nigel's question from Pingala first, because he needs to leave at 7. So anything related to Pingala's projects, I'll pop in the chat and I'll ask them to him first. Before you leave the webinar, a link to a short feedback survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd really appreciate if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete it. We'll also send that link via email, so if you don't have time tonight, you will get a chance again, as well as the resources, links that we mentioned during the webinar, and a link to the recording of this session when it's available in a few days' time. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Will. And yes, please pop your questions in the Q&A if you have anything during his presentation. Thanks, Will. Welcome.
Thanks, Babs. Thanks for the kind introduction. It's I guess a pleasure to be here on behalf of Allume. So this evening we'll be running through a little bit of what is Allume, SolShare, and how shared solar on apartments does look like, as well as a few of the opportunities that are coming up in this space that we're lucky enough to be a part of and help facilitate. So conscious of, we always find that there's always a beautiful Q&A at the end. So any questions, please feel free to pop in the chat, as Babs has mentioned. It's a great opportunity to, ask all those questions in this platform whilst we can as well. So bear with me, I'll get the slides up and then we can kick straight off. So love to introduce Allume. So Allume Energy as a company is a basically a renewable technology manufacturer. We're based here, we're based down in Melbourne. Now this is where I'm, I guess, joining from today. But we do operate both across Australia and internationally as well. We are out of University of Melbourne around 10 years ago as a startup. And since then, it's been a nice story of, a renewable manufacturing Australian company that still manufactures to this day here in Australia. Um, we've got a little picture there. That's one of our retrofit sites. I love an apartment building on the right-hand side there, just to give an example of basically where the types of projects that we start from in this space. So you may be wondering why shared solar. So, one of the biggest key things is, there's especially multi-residential buildings, there's a massive, large available roof space on a lot of buildings. For those that aren't aware, it's around 30% of homes in Australia are some sort of strata title, whether that's townhouses or apartments. So there's a lot of roof space there. A lot of this roof space is in highly densely populated areas, or at least medium densely populated, where there's a lot of energy that is needed in these areas as well. Obviously, the ever-increasing cost of energy bills, you want to make the use of any available space you do have, and that's where solar on the rooftop does come in. Basically, as we go towards more electrified future, whether that's fully electrified or more electrified than current, the key thing is future-proofing your building. So, whether that's adding heat pumps, batteries, EV chargers, sometime in the future. What we found that the very first step really comes down to solar, because solar is something that benefits everyone within the building, and there is a really proven benefit that's been delivered over the years throughout that time since it started becoming mainstream. Now, what we've seen more recently as well, and there's a lot of data that keeps supporting this and keeps increasing year on year, is the increase in value of your building. So at least us personally at Allume, so we've actually tracked the financial, I guess, increase in property value on a per apartment basis for apartments with and without SolShare on a per suburb basis. And generally they sell for around that 20 to 30K more than others. This even comes through in new builds as well, or new developments. But most of this data is relevant to the retrofit space. So retrofitting those apartment buildings already in our community. One of the other biggest things is just increasing your independence. As being able to have solar on your rooftop, it does mean that you're not as, I guess, reliant on having to purchase energy from those, large energy retailers. So by having that ability to access free solar from the sun or free energy from the sun, you do, I guess, reduce the impact on any cost of living increase, i.e. increase in electricity bills throughout that time period. So considering that, let's meet SolShare. So we've got a little white box example of what it does look like on a wall. So here we've got a few sites that have got SolShare installed. We have over 3,000 apartments and counting in Australia alone. We are likely seeing this with the current programs out there to be tenfold within the next 12 months. So it is quite a very exciting time. There's been a lot of interest, and New South Wales specifically will be a big part of that as well. But most of these sites here are retrofit. The centre one down here at the bottom there is one in Neutral Bay in New South Wales and Sydney. So there's quite a few relevant reference points. We do find most of our projects concentration-wise are in Sydney, just because of the sheer amount of sun that is there and the sunny days in comparison to the rest of the country, specifically Victoria. So how does SolShare actually work when it comes to a building? So SolShare itself is this little white box down the bottom here, the Allume SolShare, just for everyone's reference. But to take a step back, I'll run through how solar on an apartment building does look. So in the case example here, we've got a 15 apartment building. Now I will note that anything when it comes to shared solar can be applicable for any building from 5 to 100 plus apartments, just depending on the roof space available. And that's where we can, help assess that. But what comes through is a shared solar system. So for those familiar in the space, typically you may be able to have a shared common area system where it just helps benefit the common area. It's very much the same approach, except we do a lot more with that power instead of just powering the common area. So in short, you've got a commonly owned solar system on the rooftop, located on a commonly owned rooftop, owned by the strata. And then from there, that cables down to some inverters on the ground floor or wherever in the building as suitable. Now, the inverters are always necessary as part of any solar installation. All they do is convert that, I guess, sun-generated power, which is in the form of DC power, into AC power, which can then be self-consumed within the building on site. Now, where my favorite part of this overall infographic is of course the Allume SolShare piece. And in this site, we've just got one box. A lot of sites will have multiple SolShares, but this SolShare here, although there's only one arrow going towards the electricity meters, we actually have a physical cable that provides solar or electrons through to each and every meter, so behind the meter. So what that means is, you've got one massive large system that goes into an inverter and the SolShare, and then the SolShare will split that energy in a smart way to the tenancies who need power when they need it. So the key part of this is it's maximizing that rooftop. Use of that rooftop through a shared system that can be shared by all, but also minimizing exporting energy back to the grid, which we've got a bit of a graph later on to show you that. Because the key thing is you want to self-consume as much power as possible, because you don't get much of a feed-in tariff these days because of how popular solar is at the moment. Now, what SolShare then does is it is all connected centrally. So wherever, if you're in an apartment building, if you've ever seen your meters, the electricity meters that, go around in circles, if it's an analog one or if it's digital, you'll have a little bit of a readout. But all of those will be co-located together, either per floor or per building. And basically that's where we integrate the system. So it does mean that it is really easy to integrate into a retrofit scenario. Very minimal cabling, very basically almost zero impact to residents within the building when these projects are undertaken. So whoever the solar installation company is that does execute that, it's a nice and easy sort of relationship there with the strata. Now, the real cool part of the SolShare itself is the way that it dynamically controls the solar distribution to maximize those savings in the building. So what that means is we're constantly 5 times a second actually measuring the demand for solar or the hunger for solar from every tenancy within that building. And with that information, 5 times a second, we will then provide solar to those people who need it when they need it. Now, the first question I always get when it comes to that is what happens if there's a really big energy user and they're utilizing more power than, say, someone that's not home very often? The beautiful part of the SolShare is it ensures that depending on what percentage ownership of the overall solar system you have as an apartment. Now, to rehash apartment, I guess ownership of solar is generally a lot entitlement associated to keep things simple. But from there, what will happen is SolShare will actually allocate over a calendar month the amount of solar to you, the electrons to you associated with your ownership. So, day to day could vary as to who gets what throughout that building, but we ensure at the end of the month, everyone has received the same amount. So an analogy that I like to use is, imagine in this case, we've got 15 apartments. We had 15 empty glasses of water. What's electricity and water as an analogy here? Obviously, don't mix these, of course, but with what we do, so SolShare allocation can be represented by a glass or a cup. Now, throughout that month, SolShare will fill each cup with water as that individual apartment gets thirsty. So, people will get basically provided water at different times throughout the month. Now, the beautiful part of SolShare will ensure that at the end of the month, at the very end of the month, everyone's cups will be completely full. No one has received more water or less water than their neighbor. So it means that everyone has been provided the equitable or equal access to energy. From there, you can actually change the size of your cups, and that's where the different lot entitlement comes through. So, a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom usually have different lot entitlements, so you can equate for that way. On top of that, the key thing to note is, of your cup of water that you have, as with any standard solar system, you'll self-consume or drink a portion of that yourself. And the idea is you want to consume as much as possible. And any excess that's provided to you that you don't self-consume, you can actually sell back to your energy retailer to get that feed-in tariff. Obviously, we don't want to send too much back as export, but anything you do not use, for example, if you're on holidays for an entire month, you still have to receive your solar from the energy system or from the solar system. So you still get reimbursed financially for that by your energy retailer. And it is important to note as well, this is also relevant to ensure that everyone has freedom of choice when it comes to the energy retailer, because we don't impact that in any other way. When it comes to the actual, I guess, solar distribution, what we've done here is to look at an apartment view from a graphical sense around SolShare allocation. So the amount of solar allocated to an apartment on average against an individual system per apartment. So obviously, as we saw on the last slide, we've got one shared system for 15 apartments. The only alternative to SolShare is to do a small individual system per apartment. Now, the limitations, as we can see in the without a SolShare piece, is if you go for an individual system, you can only access the 2 or 3 panels that you're connected to. So as we can see here, the green line represents the amount of solar being provided to you. Now, as we can see, the green is at the highest point is in the middle of the day when the sun is at the highest point. So that's when the most solar is being generated. But from this graphical view, we can also see the navy blue line, and that's where the navy blue line represents your actual energy demand, your usage. Now, where the green line is above your energy demand, that's where you're receiving a 7 cent, it's probably even 4 cents these days, feed-in tariff, depending on who your retailer is. And then where the solar isn't meeting the full needs of your, I guess, energy demand, that's where you're paying 30 cents for electricity, especially in the evening times as well. Now, with SolShare, it's a little bit different. It's the same amount of solar allocated. So in this case, it's a 1.7 kilowatt system equivalent in March. So it's not perfect sun, of course, but still very good. Now, with this 1.7 kilowatt allocation, when it comes to SolShare, you're not limited to 1.7 kilowatts. Because of the sharing capabilities of the SolShare, you can actually access a much larger portion of the system instantaneously when you need it. And then potentially at times, if you're not using any, you don't have to be receiving solar at all. So as part of that, we shift more of the solar generation to the areas underneath your, navy blue line. So what that means is instead of exporting as much back to the network, you're actually self-utilizing that power. So instead of selling it for 7 cents and making 7 cents, you're avoiding having to pay 30 cents for every kilowatt hour of energy generated. Now, if there's any questions around this sort of, I guess, the savings on this, please feel free to pop in at the end as well. Be more than happy to cover any queries there. I always love showing this slide. So what we find is when it comes to an apartment building, a shared solar system is a commonly owned asset. It's a shared asset. And if you relate it to, say, a pool, if you're lucky enough to be in a New South Wales apartment that has a pool, the idea is everyone can share in the benefit. Everyone contributes to it, but everyone shares in that benefit and gets to experience that. So it's just a little bit of a fun way to look at it, that it is, I guess, a tool that you can use for that as well. Now, one of the key things is the investor-owner relationship as well. So what we find is typically there's a lot of renters that reside in apartments. To take an example, around 60% in Victoria, 60% of apartments are rented out. From memory, it's a little bit less in New South Wales, but I could be wrong on that because it's been a bit of a while since I've seen that data. But basically what that means is when we are looking at these sites, there's a lot of renters involved with investors. So as the investor and the homeowners are the decision makers in these buildings, it is really important to explain why there is some benefit. So what we've seen is a couple of years ago, there's been some pushes for home energy ratings, which will be required for apartments, hopefully starting early next year, possibly later this year, depending how we go. So this will give basically a higher transparency on the energy efficiency, energy costs associated with an apartment, and allows, I guess, tenants to be able to see that as well, or future tenants. So it's, when you think of a marketability point of view, it is quite attractive to be able to do that. We often quite see as well where an investor will take part in a, shared solar project in an apartment, and they can increase, the rent, as a split incentive. So if you're saving $500 a year as a resident, and the renter is the one with the electricity account, so they're saving financially, maybe they split the do I guess a benefit split. So they might say, as a landlord, let's increase the rent by $5 a week, our next rent renewal, and then, you'll be saving $10 a week on solar. So, balances that out. So then everyone wins. Also noting that the common area connection, which is paid for by Strata, also the investor, will have additional savings anyway as a connection because it's looked upon as just another apartment, just a bigger apartment. So there's still additional benefits there. Um, of course, the solar increases unit property values. According to Domain, it's meant to be up to a fully electrified home with solar, or I should say unit or apartment, is meant to be worth around 12% more, which is over $100,000 more. We try to be a bit more conservative with our estimates, and that's why we had earlier around that 15 to 20 mark. But it can be, how long's a piece of string? It really depends on the owners you are having coming through that property. But we do know through our property developer, our new build aspects of the business, that developers sell their properties quicker where they have SolShare installed, which is an incredible thing to speak to. The other thing is, making a bit of a difference for a tenant is great. Obviously, houses are in short supply, but obviously empowering your individual and, easing their life in some way, especially with cost of living, everyone's going to be happy with that at the end of the day. So it's building that relationship and looking after that tenant so they stay longer, of course. And there's also, as we've mentioned earlier, because of the large, I guess, proportion of renters, it is really important to address this when you go through the decision-making process when it comes to strata in New South Wales, which is a majority vote sort of approach. It's the same decision-making process that is taken for any sort of solar system on that rooftop. Now, there's been some really, really fun, I guess, initiatives from a government perspective coming through. Victoria launched in January their Solar for Apartments program. This is their Victorian iteration of the federally known Community Solar Banks program. Now, Victoria and ACT have kicked off their programs. New South Wales announced theirs in February. Didn't kick off the program like Victoria, but announced theirs in February. And basically what that means is we're expecting that to come through in the next couple of months. Now, it is designed to help not every apartment building, but most apartment buildings. And as we've seen in Victoria, has been up to $2,800 per apartment to cover the cost, applied for on a per building basis. So nice and simple. There is no cap percentage on the proportion that it funds, but usually sits around that 70% on average that we find. It basically covered 5 to 50 apartment complexes, but it was capped at 5,000 apartments, which is, less than 2% of all of them. And it was very, very, very competitive. They've actually just announced their round two, which is another 5,000 apartments due to the sheer demand. We personally had interest from around 700 buildings. So what's that, around 15,000 apartments ourselves within around a 3-month period. And that's just us as a company, obviously providing the key tech, but it was very, very incredible. But yeah, that is direct funding to strata and owners corps, depending on how you view it. And we are very excited to see that come through for New South Wales. But the biggest thing we implore is making sure people are prepared for when that does come through, whether that's getting assessed, whether that's getting familiar with solar installers, checking the building roof type, all of that jazz, just to see whether this is something viable for when it comes through. Now, as part of this, Willoughby Council do their own massive, I guess, feasibility assessments or energy audits for sites, including in the apartment space. Now, as a complementary benefit, Allume is more than happy to be able to provide their own or our feasibility assessments that we look at, an estimation on costs, savings, project costs, budget, payback period, etc. This is done on a desktop level for any apartment building looking at getting solar. Now, that's something that we can more than help out with. So whether that's through the Willoughby Council or directly through our website, I'm more than happy to always help that. That is a complimentary service as well. We've found that due to the amount of funding available, we really want to help as many people at least get prepared for this. And it gives that tool to do that. And we also give all the strata, how to work with your strata, what is the strata process, what's required, the resolutions, whether it's voting, all of that jazz, even finance, or how to pay for things. We do a lot of educational Q&As on how that's done also. Now, a lot of the common questions, and hopefully we'll see some come through at the end of the Q&A as well, or at the end of the presentation. A lot of questions we usually get around roof types, roof access, safety, structurals, also around convincing owners that aren't interested, including, does everyone have to agree on this? Bits and bobs like that. I mean, to answer that, no is the answer, because it is, strata is almost a democracy type. But it is important that we go through these things to make sure people understand, to give the best projects, the best chance of success. Now, we also run through typical financials and how that's done. So that's usually, a lot if there's money in your sinking fund, you might have a special levy. Additional to that, a bit of strata finance, and then any grants that are available. So the grants are, of course, first, and looking at what's there for everyone. And that's my details there, my contact email. So that sort of covers off my part of this. So I'll pass over to Nigel, who will be happy to, or back to Babs.
Thanks so much, Will. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions, but that was very interesting. I'll hand over to Nigel for a few minutes so that he can share his case study. Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Barbara. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling from Darkinjung country on the New South Wales Central Coast, and acknowledge the elders past, present, emerging from this region. So if you're not familiar with Pingala, we're a community organisation and not-for-profit association that has a vision for a fairer energy system. And the way we go about this is we do projects that empower people to own, operate, or be involved in and share the benefits of largely solar, just because that's been the best renewable energy to do a lot of this with, but we don't limit ourselves to that. And recently, we've had the opportunity through some private funding to look at solar for social housing, which I'll sort of talk about 2 systems we've installed under that program. But the reason why social housing came up is because since 2018, we've been looking at, along with Community Power Agency and UTS, this idea of a locked out user. So people who aren't able to contribute or participate in the solar revolution that was happening. I think everyone heard about 1 million solar homes about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's well over that now, but they're all been owned homes and standalone homes. So there's a lot of people out there with potentially sort of considered unsuitable roofs, and this system might not solve their issues. There's other programs for that, but definitely apartment dwellers, renters, and people who are low income, these sort of systems can benefit from. And we really feel we're in good company here with Allume, and also with the recent announcement this week. I'm not sure if you've seen this, Will, but they've announced the energy strategy for New South Wales. That includes a little bit more detail on the funding for apartment dwellers and renters to access solar systems. So things are moving along, but the question that Pingala tends to find itself asking more often is not when will the transition happen, but will it be fair? So that's sort of what we sort of focus on, and why social housing particularly, but also renters and low income people in low income housing has been an important issue for us. So just on this slide, you can see there a picture of me and our installer on a system in Bondi. This is an independent living apartment block. So this system will help reduce the bills, but also increase the comforts, like the living comfort of people in this apartment block. Make it possible to have more heating, more cooling, stuff like that, because a lot of that's offset by the solar system. If we go to the next slide. So really looking at a system for social housing, it needed to be flexible. A lot of the buildings that that you look at for renters and apartment buildings, they're not standard. It's very hard to get infrastructure that's fit for purpose when it comes to installing solar. I kind of like this picture here because this one at the second site we did in Erskineville, the inverters are actually on the other side of the site, and then they found this nice little cubby hole for the SolShare system right next to the meters. So it makes for a good demonstration of how, and the inverters are 2 inverters in this system actually. So it's 2 inverters, 1 SolShare system, but all going equally to all 12 meters on site. So we were able to work with the installer and find a solution that best fit the site and the residents and how they how their energy infrastructure is set up. Ease of function has also been a thing that we've looked at with this. All the sites will have access to a portal. Will's already talked about the allotment system that they have that allows people to adjust how much apartments share. This we're hoping, just from our sort of our values, we're hoping will allow people to be a lot more engaged in their energy usage on site, discuss it with their neighbour, talk about who's using what, who needs more, who needs less. We hope that things like this will encourage sharing. So Will gave the example of people going away and getting the feed-in tariff. I'm actually hoping that when people go away, they'll gift that percentage to their neighbour, and that's and we see that as a possibility, and that's the sort of dialogue that we hope to encourage. And yeah, we'll also touch on this as well, but direct to meter just means that it leaves complicated energy trading systems and the need for a common retailer and some other issues that more complex approaches have, just leaves it by the wayside. It allows us to sort of just go back to the basics of what a solar system is and was. So these 2 sites would have functioned, if they were a single household, been very easy to just have a solar system installed on the top of the roof, receive that generation to the building, but never got solar because they're apartment blocks. And only through working with the residents, just getting the residents together to discuss it, working with, in the case of these sites, social housing providers as well, and getting them together with an installer to come up with a solution means that these 2 sites now have solar. So yeah, I just came along to sort of share that story, and I'm happy to answer any questions. On the next slide, my contact details, and happy for anyone to reach out if we don't cover anything. Like Barbara said, I'll probably have to duck off early, but we'll try to get through everything.
Thank you so much, Nigel. It's so great to hear those actual real-life projects as well that are using the technology. If you have any questions specifically to Nigel's projects, please pop them in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry. Otherwise, I'll get started with asking some of the questions to Will. One of them was, what's the lifespan for the solar panels usually?
Yeah, great question, Bab. So when it comes to, I guess, relating it solely to SolShare projects, at least for the answer here, we actually completely agnostic to whatever panels or even inverter that's selected on these sites. Now, an industry average, however, for any tier 1 solar panel that's out there, now for anyone that's heard the statement tier 1, really what that actually means is whether it can be sold within Australia or not. So it's a nice little thing to be aware of that, where people say tier one solar panels, it just means it's able to be sold in Oz. But basically, most of those panels will have a lifespan of 25 to 30 years as a bare minimum from a performance warranty point of view. When reviewing, I guess, any sort of or quotation or submission from a solar installer, the panel selected, and there's a lot of panels. I think Solar Quotes is a really good reference. Otherwise, Willoughby Council, I'm sure, can provide some sort of advice on it as well. But you'll have your performance warranty, which is that 25 to 30 year mark, or you'll have your product warranty on the panels. And the product warranty itself is usually 10 to 25 years. But they're two separate warranties that sit there. So, but in the scheme of things, 25 to 30 years easily is a safe estimate.
Right, thanks for that. And a second question is, what's the maximum size of the building? Can it have 200 plus units? And I would add to that, what's the minimum size as well that makes it worth installing?
Yeah, great question. So we generally start from anything from 5 units plus a common area connection. So pretty small buildings in the scheme of things. We are working on projects as much as 150 apartments per building. So a lot of the time, you might have multiple buildings on site. It really will just depend on what the available roof space is. Now, as long as generally we have at least 1 kilowatt of solar, or even a little bit under, 1 kilowatt of solar on average per apartment. And we can sort of review very quickly in 5 minutes whether your building will be, I guess, size large enough for that. Alternative to that, sometimes we do see partial uptake. So maybe half the building might partake in solar if not everyone wants to take part. But we find that generally everyone does take part because everyone is, they get a bit of a FOMO, fear of missing out when it comes to this because they are long-term systems and the benefits are so large. And whether it's trying to finance, there's, I guess, mechanisms to help access the systems.
Great, perfect, thank you. The follow-up from your answer regarding the lifespan, they wanted to factor in the return on investment as part of the consideration. So that was the reason for the question. And are there any ongoing costs for the systems after the install charges?
Yeah, great question again. So when it comes to the SolShare piece, SolShare itself is a closed system, so there's no maintenance, etc. required, which makes life quite easy. To add to that, everyone has their own monitoring portal as well to see their own individual data. So you can see your own solar being provided to you, your 24-hour energy demand, your solar self-consumed and solar export, all back to the network. So you'll be able to see that as an individual view, just to see what you're doing and help, I guess, educate yourself or encourage better use of that solar or to take advantage of it. That's something that's still included as standard. For the rest of the system, as with any solar system, being an electrical system, there is usually when a solar installer finalizes an install, they'll provide a recommended maintenance schedule. Generally, that's a system check, maybe once a year, every 2 years, and a panel clean or inspection to see if the panels need cleaning to make sure they're operating at a high enough efficiency. Because depending on where you live, maybe a bit of sea spray, it might influence how clear those panels are. But yeah, very little maintenance in the scheme of things would be the answer.
Right, thank you. And I remember hearing from another case study you did about the need for the SolShare to have access to the internet. So that could be an associated cost if it's in a meter room that doesn't have internet access.
Absolutely, Bab. So we strongly recommend that an internet connection is provided for a solar install, including with SolShare. So with that, you then have access to both the inverter level data, so the inverter, how it's functioning, which allows the installer, whoever's installed it, to also monitor it as well. So if there is an issue for whatever reason, it's a lot easier to solve that problem, possibly even remotely. On top of that, to be able to view your data from the system, you do need that internet connection there. But the solar installers basically cover all of that and guide. So generally it might be a little wireless modem, little industrial modem that's included for the system to help with that. Or it might be a cabled connection from a common area, say internet connection, if it is in an area that there's no, I guess, 4G signal. But at the end of the day, it's just about finding the right solution. And the solar installer, whoever that may be, will be able to help with that, definitely.
Great, thank you. That makes sense. Do you have a ready-to-go info pack for renters that they can take to the owner corporation for consideration?
We've been in the process of developing one. We've found that quite often what we'll do is once we provide a feasibility assessment to a strata building, we will then basically recommend they schedule a Q&A session with the building. And we really implore all the investors, even renters and owner occupiers, owners committee, of course, or strata committee, to attend that. We found that that's been really successful. In saying that, we do have a lot of resources, most common Q&As, and there's a lot, or FAQs, I should say, that we provide that has quite a few answers around I guess, the investor aspect to it. So more than happy to share some of that material as required.
Right, thank you. The next question is for myself. Will Willoughby Council communicate individually with each building manager of strata community about the shared solar program for apartments? So the answer to that will be no, unless we're doing the level 1 energy audit on your building, then you'll be in touch with a consultant who can then refer you to Allume, but we won't be installing that anything ourselves. But then we can definitely have individual communication. So if that answers your question, great. Otherwise, feel free to specify what you meant, but we can send the info to be shared to the rest of the strata committee. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question. I did have a couple that I received ahead of time, which was, do you have a bespoke EV charging system integration?
Ooh.
Is that a bit of a tricky one? Sorry.
No, it's a good question. So typically what will happen is it's a question that comes up in most projects to some form. So there's one of two things. So typically at the moment, what will happen is you'll have an EV backbone installed. This is completely separate to solar, of course, but you'll have an EV backbone installed within that building. So that'll be an additional, I guess, electrical board that comes off the common area connection within that building. So the building services connection. And from there, people will be able to connect their charger or a car charger to that. And it allows for load management, demand management within the building to make sure that the building's not overloaded, of course. With that approach, because it is on a separate connection than the apartment, you can't use your own solar being provided to your apartment to charge your EV, because everyone's separated via their meters. Now, if, however, you have your own EV charger and it sits as a load behind your apartment, or behind your meter, you can then use your solar to charge your EV. Because as far as SolShare is concerned, it's just looking at the overall demand from that apartment. And if you might have your kettle, your fridge, your EV charger, all of those things sit behind your own meter then, and you can then benefit from charging your EV that way. We don't see that many EV chargers yet being implemented, but there are the odd ones, and a lot of them are behind the individual meter. But obviously, there's been a lot of investment from New South Wales government on facilitating assessments and, I guess, some grant funding for EV backbones within buildings. So we'll definitely see, I think, a lot of innovation in the space.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that should be something that comes up more and more as we get more chargers in buildings. And do you require any changes in metering to install SolShare?
Yeah, again, great question. So as we are just behind the meter solar, the approach is no different to, say, a standalone system on a standalone home. So because you are potentially exporting solar or selling it back to the network, um, as part of the solar installation, you will need to, if you do have analog meters on site, you will need to upgrade to a smart meter to allow for solar to be installed. So it's just a regulatory requirement from that, from I guess from a government perspective or the regulators, and that's the only change. So sometimes there will be some impacts to meter boards or updating of meter boards, which is actually quite a key point as well to mention. Um, there are a lot of older sites across a lot of the states across Australia with outdated meter boards that aren't up to current electrical safety standards. So what we've found, especially in Victoria, is where there's rebates available, and minimum standards are starting to be implemented or at least enforced as well. It's an incredible opportunity to bring up an older building from electrical standpoint up to spec as well and up to standard. Um, and any solar installer or any reputable solar installer can definitely help provide that, because they are all, of course, electricians to be a solar installer as well.
Great, thank you so much. The last one I've got is, what percentage of apartment needs to vote yes to be able to go ahead with the install?
Yeah. Now, this varies on a per state basis. New South Wales is actually one of the more generous states, or the most generous or easy to implement states. A couple of years ago, the New South Wales government implemented sustainability strata legislation changes, which meant that any solar installation on a rooftop specifically was able to be installed via a common or ordinary resolution on that building. So usually you have an ordinary or a special resolution. In this standpoint, we have an ordinary resolution. To pass an ordinary resolution, once you've reached a quorum at a meeting. Now, a quorum, I'll discuss that briefly in a second, but once you've reached a quorum, basically it's just a simple majority vote. So let's say you have 50 apartments within a building, and we have 40 people that turn up to the meeting or turn up online to vote, or in a voting ballot if it's done that way, and 21% say yes. 19, actually even 20 say yes, let's say. 19 say no. One person doesn't vote at all. That project would be accepted and passed through, and could then be implemented for the entire building. In addition to that, there's a quorum, and how a quorum is assessed within strata is generally 25% of the building. However, when it comes to New South Wales strata regs, when setting a meeting to make a decision, if you haven't reached 25%, around half an hour after the meeting kicks off, what you can do is then assess that everyone that's, say, the committee's there and a few residents, so even let's say 5 people from a 50 apartment building attend, and they say, yep, cool, we've reached a quorum, everyone's had the opportunity to attend. We can then take a vote with that many people. So in a case like that, even for a large group of apartments, you could make a decision with 3 people voting yes and even 2 people voting no. It is a lot easier than, say, Victoria or Queensland, although Victoria has been incredibly successful with their solar for apartments programs and with fundings. They need at least 50% of everyone to say yes within those buildings. So it is, an exciting time for those that might be interested within New South Wales.
Right, it's really good to know. Another question, does the system take into account 3-phase power, for example, split into the 3 phases?
Yeah, another excellent question. Good quality ones. This is amazing. So with as part of any SolShare install, we can mix 3 or single phase connections. So quite often your common area will be a 3-phase connection, and then the apartments are generally single phase. So if you do have a SolShare, let's say, I will also note that each SolShare itself has up to 15 connections or 15 connections. So where you may have an apartment building of 25 units, all it means is you'd have 2 SolShares, because then you have the capability for 30 connections. Now, if you are a 3-phase connection, that's 3 connections. But I will note that if you are a 3-phase apartment, generally not all 3 phases will be connected. Only the most dominant phase of your apartment is generally connected, because most of the loads will be on that phase. And then usually only like an instantaneous hot water or an induction cooktop will be across all three phases. And then there's still some benefits across all three phases due to net metering. But in short, to answer that question, there's no issues with that. Yeah, single, three phase, whatever it is, it can be mixed, and it doesn't affect it.
Amazing. Thank you. I don't have any more questions in the Q&A. So we might be able to wrap up super early, which is probably great news for everyone who wanted to get on with the evening. I don't know if Nigel, you had anything to add regarding your case studies, your buildings that have installed SolShare. Do you have any major learnings? Was the install process fairly straightforward?
Yeah, I'd probably like to say that the install process and the design process was very, very similar to a regular solar system install and design. And we've done several of them prior to this, and it was the same look and feel. It just included more connections. So there was a little bit of that social element of it, and I suppose that's kind of where we emphasize our activities a little bit. So that's probably not surprising that that's where I saw the difference. But yeah, there was very little in terms of engaging with an installer between a regular solar system and including a SolShare. It is just another mix in the infrastructure that you can put solar on your roof. So I suppose I would like to make a bit of a pitch for ourselves. Like, Pingala is here as a community association to provide support to communities who want to do these sort of things. So if you're feeling a little bit unsure about it and you do need someone to help talk through the process with the strata committee and stuff like that, like we're here as a community association to do that as well. So
Great, thank you. And I think we can let you go now and go to your other commitments tonight. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories.
Yeah, thank you all, and yeah, to all the people who came along, good luck with your journeys, and yeah, to Will and Barbara and Willoughby Council, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nigel. And I've got another question for you, Will, that's come up. How do you manage owners who don't want to be involved?
Yeah, another excellent question, especially in the much large buildings. With the beauty of the SolShare is you can do a partial uptake as well. So you don't have the requirement to connect everyone within that building. Although 99% of the time everyone ends up getting connected, we do have those edge cases where maybe there's not enough roof space to connect everyone, or there may just be someone that really, really doesn't want to be connected to solar, and that's more than okay. Now, in those scenarios, I guess one of two things will happen. Where we have a subsection of apartments connected, only those apartments can then be connected in future if you say you've used up all the roof space. Or alternative to that, you may have one individual who just doesn't want to be connected. So what will then happen with that one is we basically have everyone physically connected because that's all done at commonly owned area or property where the meters are, because that's not owned by the individual, it's owned by the strata building. And what will happen with the SolShare, you do have the ability to keep someone turned off. So let's just say, John from Unit 10, for whatever reason, can't be connected to solar or doesn't want to be connected to solar in his apartment. You can actually have that turned off. And generally, what we see is maybe the strata will take ownership of the cost to have that person connected. But then the strata can then own that sort of connection until, say, John moves out from the tenancy, someone else moves in, and then that person goes, oh, well, I want to be connected now. And then they can, basically work with the strata and unlock that connection and get that turned on. That's all digital, so it's really easy to do. Of course, for anyone that is looking to get these sorts of projects and then sells their property, you can only market that it has SolShare connected or shared solar on an apartment connected if you're connected. So, there's just a few considerations, but it is, there are, I guess, available options where people do want to opt out.
Yeah, great, thank you. And for common areas, how does it work?
Yeah, so with the common areas, it is the same. I guess it looks the same as any other apartment. So with the SolShare, as mentioned earlier, you have your different size cups depending on your lot entitlement. The other beautiful part of it is you can then allocate, a much larger proportion to the common area as well as desired. So SolShare just looks at it as another apartment. So usually a bit higher loads, high lifts um, and energy needs. So we just then can provide solar to that connection as well as required. So it's nice and straightforward.
Great, thank you. Someone's asking, can an unused allocation be sold to another participant at, let's say, a hybrid cost, for example, 25 cents per kilowatt hour? Win-win.
Um, simple answer, sort of. I wouldn't say a simple answer, but um, so yes and no. It will depend on what phase of electricity you are as an apartment, as to whether you could say purchase the other person's allocation. It also is generally the case that we like to keep, or the recommendation is keeping people's, I guess, ownership associated with lot entitlement. So when maintaining the asset, even if it is, I guess, straightforward maintenance every year, that's a cost to the strata, although it will be very, 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 very low. It is something that is paid for by all the lot owners, and then paid for proportionately to lot entitlement. Now, if you do have an unused allocation, it's easy to implement bylaws to allow for that and all of that jazz. But there's just the consideration that there's a few electrical points that need to align to make sure that that's possible. Maybe
Right.
one day we might have any unused solar you could sell between different apartments, but that's not relative to apartments, it's relative to all homes. So if something like that comes in for all homes, apartments, especially where SolShare is connected, is absolutely fine.
Great, thank you. Are flat roofs suitable for solar panels?
Yeah, good question, Eva. And now that I've got the Q&A open as well, so I can see the names. So with that, a lot of flat roofs. Now, there's one of two things you can do, of course, install on a flat roof. If anything, it just means that, maybe you clean it every 12 months rather than every 24 months, or have a solar installer clean. Alternative to that, you can add tilt frames on a flat roof as well from a solar installer. So it basically just means that they're or instead of being flat, they're tilted up slightly, and there's a frame that's associated with that. It's nice and straightforward, only a very small additional cost. But either way, we see a lot of installations happen in both manners.
Amazing, thank you so much.
Might be happy to answer, maybe just add something about batteries as well, if you're happy, Babs.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
yeah, please go ahead. Let us know.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of I guess interesting questions we get around batteries as well, especially because apartments are a little bit different to say a standalone home. Basically, the inverter that you choose for the solar installation, people can choose a hybrid inverter rather than a traditional solar inverter. A hybrid inverter does allow you to couple a DC battery to it, or a DC coupled battery. All that means is if you do it now or in future, it just means that instead of exporting any extra solar back to the network, it'll capture that solar to then be utilized when there's a lack of energy available or lack of solar available, whether that's in peak times within the building or whether that's after dark within the building once the sun's gone down and there's that spare solar capacity left. SolShare will still be in charge of sharing that solar in the same manner that it does, whether there's a battery there or not. But we do recommend that, we get started, get a system installed, and then review the data from the SolShare from a site basis after 12, 24 months. And then you can size a battery appropriate to the needs of that building. Because we find that batteries almost double the cost of the overall install, but they don't double the benefit. So it's just finding what works best, especially when the innovation change with batteries is so high. And who knows, there might be more rebates that pop up for batteries.
There are rebates coming in November, so watch this space, everyone, if you were looking at batteries, just from the New South Wales government. I've got another question. Can a lot owner install solar panels living on the top floor if in the instance that no one agrees?
It will really be dependent on the, I guess, the plan of subdivision that is associated with the, I guess, the strata entity. Quite often the rooftops are commonly owned by everyone within the building and does not belong to the, say, the top floor apartment. However, in saying that, there are some edge cases where that does occur. So it really just depends on who has ownership of that rooftop. If we look at Victoria, for anyone to access the funding, in Victoria, it had to be commonly owned rooftop to install upon. So it's just reviewing. It's always a good thing to check, double check. We can always help out with checking, or your strata manager can check in advance if you want to be really prepared and get on top of that.
Yeah, so we need to follow up on that question, even the instance of the rooftop being a shared the property. Can someone install an individual solar system, not necessarily through SolShare? Or is that the same process as you said?
Yeah, in that process, you absolutely can. The only difference will be that you'll need to basically put together and design a bylaw to allow for that, and then still get approval through via an ordinary resolution to have that allowance. So the decision-making process, even for one person to install their own system, is still the same. So you'll still need to request that everyone votes, and then it's still that majority ordinary resolution outcome for the vote to allow that to happen.
Right, thank you. And following up, can you install on a balcony?
Depends on the integrity of that balcony. Potentially. It's very much, I'd recommend a solar installer checking it out to see whether that's possible or not. But it will just depend on, yeah, whether that balcony can withhold the load or not, whether it's structurally sound enough. We see overseas, I see a lot of panels hanging off balconies, or at least photos of them. Obviously, we have quite a lot of safety laws here in Australia, so it really just depends on what's suitable for that building.
Yeah, great, thank you. And if a roof gets a lot of leaf litter from surrounding trees, will that affect the solar panels from Eva?
Yeah, it's one of those things. So you may have heard, people may have heard about shading on solar panels. If trees are shading a solar panel, it will reduce the overall, I guess, efficiency of the panel and potentially the system if it's not an optimized system, which is an additional module that can go onto them. Any leaf litter that's getting in the way, will impact that as well. So it really just depends on how often it needs to be cleaned. A lot of the time, with installs where there might be, large gum trees or trees that do drop a lot of leaf litter, for example, they might have, similar to bird netting, around the panels to stop everything getting underneath. But it's just something that will depend on that site. But in short, it won't prevent the solar panel install significantly. It's just mitigating that in other ways.
Yes, clean your solar panels regularly, which is easier said than done when they're on top of a apartment building. I think Mary had a question. Oh yes, I'll be sending the link to the recording to everyone as soon as it's available in a couple of days. So I will send an email to anyone who's registered. You'll get the recording so you can watch it in your own time or share with other apartment owners, whether or not they're in the Willoughby Council area. They can benefit from learning. And I guess the next step now is if you an apartment owners or strata or building manager and you are interested in finding out more, you can I'll send you an email with a few links so you can just follow the link to the Willoughby Council. If you're a Willoughby Council resident, there'll be a link where you can apply for an energy assessment. We'll get back to you if you're eligible to take part. If not, we can direct you directly to Allume, so you can do their feasibility assessment. And if you're particularly interested in SolShare systems specifically, you're welcome to contact Will directly, because I'll put his contact details there too.
Thank you, Babs. And I will mention as well, we personally don't install the product in any way. So we just work directly with a solar contractor. We have a very big, I guess, network of them, especially in Sydney. They just need to be, I guess, SolShare certified and have done the training modules to make sure they can install SolShare. But I say that because we do sit, I guess, slightly separate to that, as we still will sell, I guess, a SolShare product, being fully transparent. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that that end solution is being provided is something that's suitable for that building. Because a lot of people in that building that, we'd love for them to, via word of mouth, tell other people that live in apartments and share their experience. So really, really big on that as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you were saying you had 3,000 SolShare systems. Was that correct in Australia? Was that in Australia or in New South Wales?
3,000, individual apartments connected
Okay, sorry.
within Australia. And looking to rapidly increase with the funding that's available. We've got about another 3,000 in Victoria on the go in various manners. And New South Wales is looking to be much larger than that. So very exciting times, to say the least.
Right. Thanks so much, Will. That was very informative. Hopefully people have got all their questions answered and they're feeling inspired to look into getting solar for their building. So thanks everyone for attending. I'll send you a follow-up email just now with all the links that you need to get started. If you're interested, please take a couple of minutes to do our feedback survey as well. It's very valuable for us to continue running those sessions. And have a great evening. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Babs, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for coming.